Chapter 51. The Forgot. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the forums, millions of players had already joined the event, the Great Riposte. Their first objective, they decided, was to chase the Federation soldiers from Monstanopolis, seeing as how it was an ultra-strategic city connecting two continents. Barely 100 soldiers and a single combat mech were guarding it. Apophis, seeing these plans, knew it would be the perfect place to strike a blow against the anti-Federation Eternals. Only about 100 players had joined the Federation, but they were mostly elite solo players. Apophis was more than confident that they could hold their own in the war. However, when he inspected the players under his command, one particular detail made Apophis freeze in place. Lotus was there. Emma. His girlfriend from his first life. The woman he'd dumped in a fit of jealous despair, then spent the rest of his life regretting it as Neo, Crack held him in a tight grip. At this point in the game, Lotus was a LVL-8 engineer. It seemed that her skill as an individualistic solo player was already strong. Lotus was a dark-skinned girl who had originally lived in India, though she later lived in Paris, like Apophis. Or at least, she had in their first life. Her face was calm and collected as she talked with a few other players about the upcoming mission, an expression which hid her caring and selfless nature. In this new life, Apophis had decided that he would never rely on anyone else ever again if he could help it. He could only redeem his failure of an original life by amassing strength. If he sought strength, Apophis believed, the rest would inevitably follow. Yet, as he saw Lotus in this new life for the first time, Apophis's heart tightened. He wanted to rush to her, hug and kiss her, and catch up after the 5 years they hadn't seen each other. Apophis's blood ran cold. No, it hadn't been 5 years since they'd seen each other. In this life, the two of them had never met. In this life, they'd never fallen in love following his mother's sickness and death. And in this life, they'd never drifted apart, and Apophis had never driven her from him. Apophis was torn. This was an important event. He needed to focus on his role as commander of the Federation Eternals, but he could only focus on Lotus. He realized that he still loved her terribly, and the possibility of starting over with her gave him a feeling of strange, manic happiness, like what a condemned prisoner must feel when he is told, at the last moment, that he is to be released. Somehow, this possibility of a new beginning filled him with a longing far greater than his desire for money or fame. But Apophis took a deep breath and reminded himself of his purpose. He needed to rise higher than any other player, seize the strength to remain independent so that no one would control him and force him into pathetic weakness ever again. He would take this opportunity to start over with Lotus, later. And this time, he wouldn't lose control. He wouldn't become weak. She'd never be as stronger than him as she'd been in their first life, and would never be tempted to spend time with other men due to Apophis's weakness and failures. No. Apophis would never lose again, especially not when it came to love. For the moment, that meant he needed to focus on the mission and lead Lotus, and all the others, towards Monstanopolis. He'd lead them to victory and prove his worth to Lotus again. About 20,000 players were camped in the forest near the ruins of Monstanopolis. They were so preoccupied with their own plans of attack that they were not at all prepared to be attacked themselves. Apophis and his squad charged through the camp surrounding the city, wiping out low-level players and winning huge amounts of EXP. After exterminating most of the enemy forces, Apophis received a notification. Level 11 achieved. Apophis ignored the notification completely, but realized that it was Lotus who occupied his mind, not the mission. Lotus hadn't yet learned the same skills that she'd had in her first life, the ones which let her command an army of battle robots, but her engineer skills were still quite impressive. She fought using explosives and mechanical armor she'd invented. It was amazing to behold. But though she was powerful, and would obviously rise to be one of Horus's top players in this life as she had in the old one, she was still nowhere near Apophis's level. That security filled Apophis with confidence. No one could stop him now. He didn't care how many people he had to murder, how many planets he had to burn, how many friends he had to betray, or how many enemies he had to ally with. Only the victory was important. The rest was just a bunch of meaningless details. Consumed with this philosophy, Apophis cared nothing for the former allies that he slaughtered in the Federation's name, many of whom had charged by his side during the siege of Tycho. So it was that Apophis earned the reputation of a traitor, an infamous and honorless man. On the forums, Apophis's reputation plummeted. The player who had once been known for protecting weaker players against tyrannical guilds, a reputation built on misunderstanding in the first place, was now seen as an antagonist to normal players. Apophis became known as the God of Death, a title used both as an insult and in begrudging respect. Lotus, on the other hand, admired this commanding player named Apophis, not only for his power and fame but also for his independence of mind. Like her, he didn't seem to care what people thought of him. After the extermination of the anti-Federation players around Monstanopolis, Lotus joined Apophis and spoke to him. "Thank you, Commander. It was a pleasure to serve under you for this mission. I hope we can meet again." Apophis, who was burning from the inside out, responded by planting a small kiss on her mouth. "Thank you, Lotus." Shocked, Lotus didn't say a word as Apophis walked away from her. Flustered, but not knowing how to react, she received an invitation to join the party of a few friends, which she quickly accepted. For a long while after, Lotus thought to herself over and over, who is this Apophis? Did my fighting impress him? I really prefer to work alone, but if he asked me to fight alongside him again, perhaps I would take him up on it. Chapter 52 The space you are listening at novelfull.audio. Hundreds of thousands of lightyears from ERA, an old man in a magnificent suit peered at the top. Secret report before him. It was Chancellor Soli, the Chancellor of the whole Federation. This report had been submitted to him by Admiral Azeroth and was absolutely incredible. It spoke of a genocide committed by the Orc Empire on the planet Era, involving some strange ritual created by the Orcs with the blood of the Tiadings. This ritual created interdimensional portals which summoned a group called the Eternals, humans all endowed with ascension power. According to the report, these Eternals had, instead of joining those who summoned them, instead courageously fought the Orcs alongside Federation troops. Chancellor Soli could hardly believe it. Not only was the Eternals' sudden appearance a major galactic event, but the Orc Empire, the most powerful galactic nation, had violated intergalactic law by attacking a Federation protectorate. Chancellor Soli ordered Azeroth to clarify this report and ordered the Federal Secret Service, FSS, to investigate the events on planet Era. But the Chancellor knew he couldn't hide this information indefinitely. Eventually, the report would be made public, and it would surely cause a real scandal. Only time would tell whether these two cataclysmic events would be an overall boon or a hindrance to the Federation. Regarding the Orc attack, the first step was to inform the galactic community. Planet ERA Apophis and Lotus had become inseparable over the 2 days since they attacked the anti-Federation players. Though he was enjoying this time, Apophis hadn't seen his family for almost a week, and he was seriously starting to miss it. Of course, he was in a gaming cabin, so his body was being fed with vitamins and food, but he also had to preserve his mental health. At this point, it was time to come back to reality. After all the PvP, Apophis had collected 113,000 GC, bringing his treasury to 513,000 GC. He'd also reached level 12. This was the advantage to open PvP, which earned the victor all their victims' money and a piece of their equipment, as well as costing the loser a whole level. Apophis wished he could sell some of his GC to earn real-world credits, but this was a terrible time for it. The exchange rate was still very low because of the recent nuclear strike and the collapse of the player economy. Apophis would be patient and wait for the exchange rate to rise once the pro-Federation players traveled to another planet with Admiral Azeroth. At that point, players would have access to the full spread of the game's economic functions. The stock market, the galactic auction, and various investment opportunities. He kissed Lotus one last time and gave her his holo watch number. Then Apophis left her and visited his underground shipyard. He left Antanria some more food and explained that he'd be gone until the Zetark experimental corvette. Alexander disconnected from the game, and his head spun worryingly. He was not well at all, but had played too much. Without real physical exercise, even the special gamer vitamins could only do so much. He struggled to his feet, careful not to repeat the scenario of his first death. Perhaps, he thought, he should install some padding on the sharpest corners of the booth in the future. Alexander took the opportunity to look at his holo watch while he caught his breath. "You have 999 plus unread messages, wow," he said in a cracked voice he barely recognized. "Well, I guess I'll read those later." For now, he would spend some good time with his family. Galactic Community. An organization similar to the real World United Nations. It groups together all the galactic nations and establishes intergalactic law, which all members agree to uphold. Chapter 53 Long Term. You are listening at novelfull.audio. While going downstairs to have breakfast with his family, Alexander came across his father, who had deep circles under his eyes. "Hello, Dad," said Alexander. His father answered, "Hey, Alexander. You'll never guess who passed LVL-3 last night, even despite the nuclear strikes." "Congratulations, Dad." His father added, "Honestly, it wasn't that hard. With the radiation mutations, monsters give a lot more EXP. And you know your dad. He's the best at what he does. But tell me, son, what's your level? I hope you're not too far behind, but don't worry, I'll happily help you catch up." Alexander answered with a superior air, "As of yesterday, I'm LVL-12. His father, shocked, didn't answer at first, but approached Alexander and grabbed his shoulder. "What? How the hell did you manage that? Tell me." Alexander, very amused, answered, "Just a little willpower, Dad. Don't worry, 10 more sleepless nights and I'm sure you'll catch right up to me." He finally went down to have breakfast with his mother. She looked really beautiful, having bought new clothes and quality makeup. Alexander had entrusted his mother with the 50,000 credits remaining from his previous GC selling, so the whole family was very comfortable financially. As an example, their breakfast was a real feast. Instead of the lowest cost food they usually ate, the table was arrayed with fresh squeezed orange juice, chocolate bread, croissants, and the famous baguettes from the local bakery. The family's morale was really high. Everyone had stopped working overtime and had the freedom to do things they loved instead. Yet, Alexander knew that was just an illusion. He couldn't just rely on selling credits forever, even if the GC/credit ratio would eventually go back up. He could give his family some money for a little while, but at the moment, could not give them a steady income that would last them for years. It was, of course, a very ambitious project. The competition was very tough, since the biggest guilds were poaching every talented player they could find, offering them huge financial benefits. He himself had received offers of six-figure salaries, which in his original life he would have accepted with his eyes closed. But he was determined to not let anyone take advantage of him now. If Alexander was going to be in a guild, it would be his own, and he would make it number one in the entire game. Of course, Alexander could provide his own guild with incredible advantages. Not only would he be able to give them knowledge of all the quests, dungeons, and raids in the game, but he also knew about many hidden planets full of resources. Under Apophis's command, his guild could become divinity. The first step was to ensure this guild would have reliable staff, people Alexander could count on to do what he needed. He contacted all the players he'd formed connections with so far and who he knew would be useful. Chocolate, Hulk, Lotus, and White. He didn't bother sending an invitation to Caesar, knowing that he was fervently committed to Renovatio Imperii. He told them all to meet him in Ommaya in 3 hours, informing them that he had a huge project he wanted to share with them. Alexander also sent messages to other Federation-aligned Eternals who had fought underneath him recently and asked them to PM him. Understandably, most of them were dedicated solo players and preferred to remain that way. Alexander gave his parents a couple last hugs, then went back upstairs and reconnected. System. Welcome to the galaxy of Horus. Apophis entered his system menu and clicked the option to create a new guild. System. Please enter your new guild's name. Eclipse. System. Creating a guild costs 15,000 GC. Do you want to continue? Apophis accepted. System. Congratulations, you are now the founder of the Eclipse Guild. Now a guild leader, it was time for Apophis to recruit his first 4 members. Chapter 54 Eclipse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. By the time Apophis arrived at the meeting place, everyone else was already there and speculating among themselves as to why he had called them. Upon revealing himself, Apophis said, "I've gathered you here to talk about the greatest opportunity of your lives. I'm inviting you all to join my guild, Eclipse. But first, a little context. As you know, the Federation camp just achieved 99% success in all its missions a few minutes ago. The Federation will soon win the war, earning us the ability to explore space itself. With this in mind, I created Eclipse and invite you all to be among my first members." Everyone seemed skeptical. White spoke up first. "I get offers every day from top guilds. They offer me huge salaries and benefits worthy of a CEO. Why should I give up all that potential for the sake of a guild created a few hours ago?" Hulk added, "I agree. Besides all that, you've gained a pretty bad reputation lately, Apophis. You know people see you as a traitor for joining the Federation, right?" Everyone added more disparaging comments, except for Lotus, who probably kept silent out of love. Apophis replied, "Listen. Of course people don't like me. Independent, successful players are always hated by the submissive members of big guilds. It's human nature to want everyone else to be just as bad off as you. Of course, I understand your arguments perfectly. I admit that, right now, I can't offer you anything close to what the biggest guilds can offer. Nevertheless, I do have an advantage which is completely unique. I can see the future, remember. Well, I'm going to reveal my secret now. In reality, I've had a secret weapon from the very beginning." Apophis stretched out his arm and let a black viscous liquid flow out. Everyone leaned in, fascinated, as the eye of Enklabasa opened in the black pool. They inspected it. Materialization of Enklabasa, soul, level. Rank. Enklabasa spoke up, surprising them all. "I have a mission for you. But it must remain strictly secret." All players received a notification. System. The soul of Enklabasa wishes to speak to you about a sensitive subject and asks to bind your soul to your oath. If you accept, you may never speak of this with anyone else. Breaking this oath will delete your character permanently from the galaxy of Horus. Everyone accepted without hesitation, and Enklabasa continued. "I thank you. I am the soul of Apophis, having fused with him in thanks for freeing me from my temporal prison. Unfortunately, my power is not what it was before. The universe, during this millennium, has stolen away my power. Nevertheless, there is a way for me to restore my old power. In truth, what you call dungeons and raids are portals to anomalies in the universe. Their energy is of unknown origin and does not come from the original Big Bang. This anomalous quality allows me and my host to absorb the power of the creatures killed inside them. However, these portals must be opened to their maximum potential if I am to restore myself, and this height of power is what you call the Iron Man difficulty level." The 5 players received a quest. Quest notification. The Resurrection of Enklabasa, 0/10, repeatable quest, level. Rank. X, summary. Enclabasa requires you to open the most powerful portals in the universe to help it regain its original form. Objective: finish 8 dungeons and 2 raids in Ironman mode. Reward for each completed dungeon: 1 million GC plus 100 skill points plus 1 legendary skill for your class. Reward for each completed raid: 100 million GC plus 1000 skill points plus 1 runic skill asterisk for your class. Additional reward upon quest completion. Chest, artifact. Everyone accepted the quest without question, as there was no immediate time constraint. Hulk spoke up. Thank you for the quest, Apophis. Not sure how useful it is, though. There's no way we have the means to finish it. Not even a single dungeon, let alone the whole thing. Apophis answered, that's where you're wrong, Hulk. But before he could elaborate, server notification popped up. Server announcement: the war between the Eternals and the United Federation of Planets is over. Winner: the United Federation of Planets. Consequences: the Eternals have been recognized as a non-hostile faction within the Federation. Those who do not respect Federation law will be considered renegades, and will be hunted down and imprisoned. Players can now access the Galactic Transport System, and can become full Federation citizens at LVL-10. Apophis smiled. I recently made an agreement with the Federation. The planet Era will be under my control, and all players below LVL-10 are legally under my supervision. We, the members of Eclipse, of course, will have the leisure to recruit absolutely all the new talent we could hope for. With every resource imaginable at our disposal, it won't be difficult at all to get these dungeons cleared. The 4 players he'd called to the meeting took a few moments to reflect. In the end, every one of them agreed to join Eclipse. Asterisk Runic. Skill rank higher than legendary.bl.net. Chapter 55 To the Infinite. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The server announcement about the end of the war caused a big stir. From this moment, people were saying, the game really began. Many guilds cancelled their short-term plans to make money, since this changed everything. All LVL-10 players could leave the planet. Now that it was time to leave the starting planet, galactic coins actually meant something again. L.RG server announcement: the first galactic auction will take place in the space station orbiting the planet Osiris in 3 days. Participation costs 50,000 GC. Register with your faction's Chamber of Commerce to take part. People went crazy on the forums as the game's currency quickly regained its value. Of course, Apophis and his group were just as enthusiastic. Especially now that the Federation was no longer blockading the planet, and Apophis would safely be able to leave. He led the members of Eclipse to the Zetark, deciding he might as well also use the opportunity to introduce Antanria. When everyone entered the shipyard, they were excited and amazed to see the Zetark experimental corvette. But they were even more astonished to find a little girl NPC with the same unique appearance as Apophis, sitting there and reading books. Antanria, of course, was thrilled to see Apophis again, and threw herself into his arms. Not wanting to complicate things, Apophis said, I present my daughter Antanria. She'll accompany us. Everyone's astonishment continued to rise at the depth of Apophis's resources. A spaceship designed by an alien race. An alien girl NPC. Everyone started to wonder about Apophis's real abilities. Could he, even now, be hiding more from them? Apophis said, our first destination is Admiral Azeroth's ship, so that he can officially appoint me as Regent of Era. Next, we'll head for planet Osiris so we can take part in the galactic auction. But before anything else, Apophis had to give the ship a name. System. What did you want to name the Zetark experimental corvette? Apophis wanted a name that was easy to remember, so he entered the name MK.1 and accepted it. Everyone entered the spacecraft and took their seats. The ship was very spacious for its size, containing 4 double berths, a well-equipped kitchen, and a small bathroom. The rest was divided between the subliminal engine room and the weapons room. The interior of the ship must have been about 100 square meters altogether. Apophis, unfortunately, still couldn't use much Cetarch technology, so he entrusted the piloting to Antanria and took the role of second-in-command. This way, he'd learn as quickly as possible. Besides, he was the only other person who could speak the Cetarch language and communicate with Antanria. Antanria pressed various controls and the shipyard ceiling opened, letting a lot of dust fall onto the ship. With a loud noise, the shipyard's restraining link separated from MK.1 and the ship left the ground. Outside, the opening of the shipyard had caused a real mess. Some players who were on the way to the ruins of Tayo saw MK.1 take off, and they all stared at the sky in shock. Everyone was amazed and incredibly jealous. Many players immediately started recording the scene, and before long, these recordings were being discussed on the forums. MK.1 took off at the speed of sound, escaped the atmosphere, and hurtled into space. The first step of their journey was Admiral Azeroth's ship, which was just about to leave the orbit of Era. Chapter 56 False Promise. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The MK.1 identified itself to the flagship, then docked. Apophis and his 5 crew members were greeted by Admiral Azeroth with great fanfare, and Apophis alone was ushered into the Admiral's chambers. Once inside, Apophis spoke. As agreed, Admiral, peace has returned to Era. In addition, some of my men are at an appropriate level to join the ranks of the Federation. I expect you to honor our agreement. Admiral Azeroth, a clever person, answered, I did my best to negotiate with the Chancellor for the right to place a regent on the planet. This was refused. However, as an admiral of the Federation, I can appoint one of my subordinates as military governor of an occupied planet. You understand that this requires you to remain incorporated into the Federation military. Apophis was annoyed by this breach of their agreement. Tell me clearly what you want, Admiral. Admiral Azeroth gave a slight smile. I suggest that you stay under my command for the time being. When the time comes, of course, you and your kind will fight alongside me to overthrow the Federation. Apophis knew that, unlike during his last meeting with Azeroth, he was in a weak position to negotiate with the Admiral. Very well, said Apophis at last. I accept your conditions. Nevertheless, I desire 2 additional things. First, I'll be granted the status and rank of Major in the forces of the Federation, as well as the resources and privileges that are normally assigned to that rank. Second, I need a bonus of 500,000 GC to be paid immediately. Admiral Azeroth was hesitant, but finally responded. Very well. The promotion ceremony will take place in 1 hour. Of course, I will give you the title of military governor of Era and the requested bonus. That seems very reasonable, considering that the Chancellor was unwilling to cooperate with our prior agreement. However, to guarantee your full cooperation, I will assign you one of my men. Colonel Ralphett, whom you have already met, will accompany you on your travels. Apophis immediately saw the truth. Colonel Ralphett would be there as a spy, with the task of reporting everything he saw to Admiral Azeroth. Of course, this wasn't an ideal situation, but Apophis realized he had no choice. Either he accepted, or his investment in the Federation would be irretrievably lost. Very well, he said at last. I accept these terms. The ceremony took place in the flagship's hangar, in the presence of some officers. Admiral Azeroth decorated Apophis with the Medal of Bravery and gave him the badge of Major. Notification. Congratulations on joining the United Federation of Planets faction. You gained the rank of Major and have been appointed military governor of planet Era. All Federation forces on Era are now under your command. You can levy taxes on goods and services on Era up to a rate of 20%. Local server announcement: the player Apophis of the guild Eclipse has become the military governor of planet Era. Respect his authority, or pay the price. Apophis took his bonus of 500,000 GC, which grew his treasury to 1,013,000 GC. This would be particularly useful during the galactic auction. After the ceremony, Apophis and his crew, now increased by one person, rejoined the Mk.1, then set off towards Osiris. Before leaving, Apophis took a moment to implement the maximum 20% tax rate on everything he could. The sales of equipment weapons, as well as dungeon entry fees and access to space transportation, were all now heavily taxed and earning him a huge profit. On the forums, the announcement of Apophis's appointment and taxation was met with shock. So this was his reward for betraying his people. Why did the price of ammunition rise by 20%? Die Apophis. Shame on you, Apophis. An old acquaintance of Apophis, Scorpion, decided this was too much, and launched a campaign to fund a mission to neutralize Apophis. In a few days, the campaign had raised over 5 million GC. But back on Era, just after the server notifications announced Apophis's new rank, Caesar laughed. He quickly sent Apophis a message. Congratulations. Our next fight will take place on another world. Within the hour, thousands of transport ships rose from the four corners of the planet and entered hyperspace. Between the potential of their new freedom and the absurd taxes levied on everything in Planet Era, the elite players knew better than to stay. In the blink of an eye, the only ones remaining on Era were those lower than LVL10. Chapter 57 Osiris. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Mk.1 would soon arrive at the Osiris space station for the galactic auction. On the way there, the crew discussed many things. All 5 crew members were quite different from one another, with perhaps the most contrast between Antanria, a little girl from an extinct alien race, and Colonel Ralphit, a disciplined military man from the Federation. Despite the strangeness of the crew's composition, the atmosphere was surprisingly good. Chocolate, Lotus, and White discussed girlish things with Antanria, who seemed to be listening attentively. She was picking up more and more of their language as time passed. Hulk, meanwhile, was fascinated by the stories of military affairs which Colonel Ralphit was happy to talk about. Only Apophis, alone on his own, was lost in this thought. After a few hours, the ship finally arrived at the docking platform of the Osiris space station. The station was absolutely huge, almost the size of Hong Kong. It served as a central commercial relay for the surrounding systems, and was therefore absolutely vital for the Federation's revenue in the area. This abundance of wealth had led over the years to the development of an entire set of related services. All these amenities eventually made the Osiris space station one of the largest commercial destinations in the galaxy. After landing, the crew disembarked and made their way from the hangar to the station's main entrance. There was an incredible queue of several thousand people there, all waiting to pass through the Federation customs post. Apophis noticed many players among those who were queuing and was slightly surprised at how quickly they'd managed to get there. Fortunately, Apophis and Ralphit were senior officers of the Federation military and could skip the queue completely. Their group passed in front of everyone in a wonderfully arrogant way, only pausing to present their military documents. Inside, an incredibly diverse and dense crowd of xeno-species thronged everywhere. Elves, golems, lizard men, and orcs all rubbed shoulders. Apophis even spotted such magnificent species as the Tenestarians, humanoids with literally angelic appearances. Apophis was used, in his former life, to the melting pot of the galaxy, but the other players shared none of these memories. For them, this was a truly unique experience. The entrance hall was filled with all kinds of exotic stores. Of course, all the players wanted to explore these stores. Ralphit cared little for this sort of shopping and remained stoic. Apophis saw this as an opportunity for a little quiet, and gave each of the players 1,000 GC from the guild's treasury. He asked Ralphit to escort them, then found the station's Chamber of Commerce and registered for the galactic auction. He also found out that it would take place in only a few hours. They just barely made it in time. But before entering the building, Apophis noticed a new queue forming in front of it, which he assumed was to register for the auction. But Apophis quickly lost interest in the queue when he saw the screens on the building side, all broadcasting galactic news. Hello. I'm Helene, your anchor for Federation news and galactic politics. Today, Chancellor Soli announced the mobilization of the Federation's military following the Orc raid on Era. Though Orc Emperor Xarxer XVI has denied any involvement of his army in the recent events on Era, the Chancellor announced a massive military exercise on the border of the Orc Empire. Our sources say this exercise will be led by the recently promoted Grand Admiral Azeroth. Apophis hadn't realized anything would actually come of the claim that the Orcs had attacked Era. He'd assumed that both sides, wary of a war, would simply forget the entire event. He hadn't realized his and Azeroth's lie could cause such damage. But he finally signed up for the galactic auction and went to the main hall to await the auction start. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 58 Galactic Auction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Apophis arrived in a huge hall majestic enough to be an Olympic soccer stadium, but 10 times bigger. He estimated the hall could hold at least 2 million people. Apophis, being categorized as an eternal, was lined up with the members of his species. In fact, each species was partitioned into a separate box. Upon arriving in his reserved box, Apophis noticed a lot of famous faces. Most of them were guild leaders, in fact, though he noticed a few solo players among them as well. The lack of single players wasn't too surprising compared to the number of guild leaders. After all, it was pretty hard at that point in the game to find the 15,000 GC required for registration unless you bought them with real.world money. Some players recognized Apophis and sent him black looks, but he ignored them. There was only one other star player here, Zelda, of the Super Guild Hyrule, a warrior. They'd seen each other quickly during the siege of Taio, but hadn't really spoken. Zelda took the initiative. She rose and made her way to Apophis in the box. Hey, aren't you that player whose head's worth 5 million? Though not all the funds had been gathered yet, all the players who hated Apophis for his new governor's position had started referring to the 5 million GC bounty they were campaigning to put on his head. Apophis replied, 5 million isn't that much. A little insulting, actually. I've got to be worth at least 10 times more. No, 100 times. Zelda laughed. She was intrigued by this other person who'd attracted so much attention on the forums. Even among the other guild leaders, it was rare for an individual to be talked about so much. How about we grab a drink after the auction, she asked, so we can get to know each other. Zelda was a beautiful woman in her 30s with blue eyes and long golden hair. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that most men would sell their soul to spend a night with her. Yet, despite feeling an unmistakable attraction for her, Apophis was eager to reform his bond with Lotus and didn't want an additional romantic relationship. So he politely declined. Zelda felt terribly insulted. After all, it was usually the men who came to her begging for sex, not the other way around. Outraged, Zelda went silent and walked away from him. Apophis put her out of his mind, for the auction was about to start. The room's lights went out and an ugly green Xeno with 8 arms and no legs appeared in an illuminated circle in the room's center. He raised a microphone and spoke into it. Hello, everyone. I will be your host for this 999th edition of the Galactic Auction. Let's start with the order of the items. First, we will auction off the weapons and armor. Then the skill books. Then the slave lots, and finally the spaceships. But that's not all. At the end of the auction, we will put on sale many mystery boxes. So stay until the end, because you will not want to miss it. Let the 999th edition of the Galactic Auction begin. Enormous applause resounded throughout the room. The first lots were uninteresting to Apophis, nothing but some overpriced weapons and armor. Most of it was useless compared to what he'd already looted, though there were several legendary items that he might have liked to buy, had they been more reasonably priced. Perhaps the next time, when he was richer. But then came the skill book lots which interested Apophis much more. The first few lots were between common and rare, and were unfortunately considerably weaker than what he already had at his disposal. But then an item caught his eye. Skill book, universal, epic, name. Zoanthropy skill summary. Invoke primal power to gain bestial power. Upon learning this skill, imagine an animal and embody it. The animal must be compatible with your class, and the choice cannot be undone. This skill can be upgraded for 100 talent points. It was perfect. The announcer yelled, "Very well." For this article, the bidding starts at 30,000 GC. Several people bid, until Apophis stood up and said, 100,000 GC. The announcer continued, "Oh ho. A 100,000 GC bid. Going once. Going twice. Going 3 times. Sold to gentleman number A6795. This would be the perfect skill for a fire master like him." Another item quickly drew his attention. Skill book, Esper, epic, name. Berserk skill summary. Channel cosmic power through your body, becoming a powerhouse of destruction. Double all your stats and all your damage for 30 seconds. This skill can be upgraded for 100 talent points. This time, Apophis wasted no time before bidding. 35,000, 48,000. 86,000. Finally, the auctioneer said, N. 94,000, sold to number A9567. Apophis felt a little bad about spending so much money at once, but decided that the next item would be his last. Skill book, Esper, legendary, name. Spatial materialization summary. Reject reality and force it to obey your will. You can materialize imagined objects. More complex and valuable objects require much more energy. Apophis was amazed that such a skill could exist. He'd never heard of such a thing in his original life. And it seemed that others were just as excited as he was. The announcer said, bidding starts at 500,000 GC. Fortunately, few people in the room could spend so much on one skill. Nevertheless, the price rose quickly to 650,000. Asserting his dominance, Apophis overbid right to 700,000 GC. He won. Good thing, too, because that was just about the most he could spend. In the end, Apophis had gotten what he wanted. Even he had to admit he was crazy for the magnitude of the last purchase, but he still had 119,000 GC left. That would be more than enough to pay his monthly bills. Even though he knew he wouldn't buy anything more, Apophis was curious what would come next, and stayed until the end. The slave auction in particular seemed to have excited everyone else, both the NPCs present and the guild leaders, who were eager to buy their first NPC companions. The sheer amount of money the guild leaders could spend made Apophis jealous. The first-rate guilds even had bankrolls big enough to afford 5 million GC to buy space corvettes. Renovatio Imperii, Caesar's superguild, even bought a destroyer-class ship for 35 million GC and 3 corvettes at 5 million GC each. Clearly, the super guilds had taken advantage of the low GC to cash rates after the war to buy up huge amounts of GC. Despite himself, Apophis felt jealous of Renovatio Imperii and their quickly growing fleet. As he watched billions of GC worth of ships change hands, he promised himself that one day, he too would have a huge fleet. As promised, the auction ended with the sale of mystery boxes. The speaker took the floor. The auction is now over, and we are now selling 1,000 mysterious boxes at 100,000 GC each. May luck smile on you. Don't forget the special Auction of the Century edition we will be holding next year. Apophis hesitated. Yes, he had over 100,000 GC left, but he really wanted to keep a bit of treasure instead of spending it on something that might be worthless. Then he remembered an instance from his old life. A player had found an antimatter warhead in one of these mystery boxes, something extremely rare and difficult to make. He'd certainly gotten more than the money he spent on the box itself. So Apophis took the risk and bought a box. He also took some time to learn the skills he'd bought, then rejoined the rest of his group and headed for the MK.1. Chapter 59, 1, Mysterious Box. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As Apophis set out to join his group in the docking bay, two players from the Super Guild, Hyrule, bumped rudely into him. They were about the same level as Apophis, which meant that they were probably elite players. Apophis turned around and glared at the two players, who also seemed to want to fight with Apophis, probably because of the way he'd insulted their guild leader, Zelda. Yet none of them wanted to make the first hostile move. After all, they were in a very lucrative zone for the Federation, who would surely neutralize them all at a moment's notice if they caused a scene. Apophis snapped, "Look where you're walking, you morons." One of the two players smiled. "You dare insult a Super Guild member? On your knees, you vermin. Apologize immediately, or say goodbye to your account." Apophis didn't answer, knowing that neither of them would actually try anything. Instead, he noted their nicknames and left the two standing there. He quickly found a patrol of Federation guards and said to their superior officer, "Hello, Captain. I'm Major Apophis, reporting two individuals wanted for drug trafficking, loitering near Hangar 8. He revealed their names and appearances, after which the captain thanked him and Apophis headed back to the hangar where his team was waiting. On the way, he saw two troublemakers being arrested. Apophis smiled arrogantly at the fools while the guards handcuffed them and took them into custody. For their parts, the two players threw copious insults at Apophis, but he just ignored them and rejoined his ship. Now it was time for his crew to begin their quest, Resurrection of Enclabasa, and head to complete their first Iron Man dungeon. Its difficulty rating would be set for LVL 10.20 players, but Apophis was confident they'd be successful despite the high-level range. He remembered a dungeon of this type lying near to their current location. Before they could reach it, however, the MK.1 would need to penetrate the border of the Commonwealth of the Lizard Men, since their destination of the planet Asur lay within it. The Commonwealth of the Lizard Men was politically allied with the United Federation of Planets, but the population was viscerally hostile to humans. The Lizard Men saw humans as a threat against their civilization, and players in particular had the genocidal trait that would make it wise to avoid contact with the Lizard Men if possible. As the MK.1 left the Isira space station, a small fleet of ships followed them into hyperspace. While everyone went to sleep on the ship, Apophis went to the ship's mess hall and took out the mystery box he'd bought for 100,000 GC. He set it on the table and inspected it. Mystery box. Summary. A very mysterious box. Apophis rolled his eyes. "Wow, thanks for all the information. I don't know what I'd do without your help." The box was a beautiful, perfect cube of metal without even a single scratch or mark. Of course, that also meant there was no obvious opening. Apophis tried to use physical strength and super-hot flames to open it, but nothing worked. After several hours of unsuccessful attempts, Apophis was losing hope and almost thought it might be a scam. But just when he was about to go to bed, the ship shuddered with slight turbulence. The cube lit up with a brief, blue light that illuminated the entire room, then disappeared just as quickly. What had just happened? Apophis stared at the cube for a few moments. Had something within the cube caused their turbulence, or was it the other way around? He got up and checked the ship's system logs, quickly finding his answer. Just moments before, the ship had experienced turbulence when it passed through the gravity shadow of a pulsar star. It was, of course, a common occurrence in hyperspace to pass through the locations where stars and planets existed in normal space. Black holes were the only things one needed to avoid if one wanted to remain alive. Apophis looked through their flight plan. Apparently, the ship would cross another pulsar star in only a few minutes. Apophis stood in front of the cube, watching it carefully, until, once again, it lit up with blue light and shut down just as quickly as before. Apophis disengaged the ship's autopilot and pulled them out of hyperspace in the same system where they'd crossed the second pulsar star. Now bathed in the pulsating electromagnetic radiation of the system's star, the cube radiated a continuous blue light. The closer they got to the pulsar star, the stronger the radiation became. Chapter 62, Mysterious Cube. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As the ship drew closer and closer to the pulsar star, the metal mystery cube took in ever-increasing amounts of energy. This fascinated Apophis, and he used the MK.1's instruments to record as much data as he could. But eventually, he had to stop the experiment, since the rest of the crew and the ship itself were in more and more danger the closer they drew to the star. Sure, players could come back to life after death, but Antanria and Colonel Ralphit couldn't, so it was best to be cautious. So Apophis changed their trajectory away from the pulsar star and returned the MK.1 to subliminal speed. However, Apophis was surprised at what happened next. Rather than the cube fading back to its original dimness, as Apophis had expected, he quickly realized that the light remained just as bright as it had while close to the star. More alarmingly, though, the glow actually seemed to be growing and to pulsate with increasing frequency. Apophis picked up the cube, trying to understand what had happened. It burst into blue-white flame in his hands. Apophis suddenly remembered the stories of nuclear accidents from Earth's past, due to safety failures and oversights regarding uranium rods. It seemed to Apophis that he was in a similar situation, having triggered some kind of chain reaction with no idea of how to stop it. Apophis urgently woke up the rest of the crew, telling them there was an emergency without wasting time on details. Apophis dropped the MK.1 out of hyperspace and put on a space suit, then took the cube with him into the vacuum of space while the ship continued away from him. The cube hummed and shook and went totally out of control. Its blue light became blinding and its vibrations sent a crackling noise through Apophis's suit until a huge jet of energy burst from the cube. A shock wave passed through Apophis, but didn't seem to hurt him. He immediately looked in his character menu to see if he'd suffered radiation poisoning or any other ill effect, but nothing seemed to have happened. Suddenly, the energy jet dissipated and a circle of blue light 3 meters in diameter shot from the cube. The pulsing light remained for nearly 10 minutes, during which Apophis was too terrified to do anything but study it. He was worried that, if he disturbed the cube now, something terrible might happen. Eventually, however, the circle shrank. Apophis knew he must act quickly, so he reached out to the blue circle and touched it, and found that his hand disappeared into it as he did so. This thing was a portal. Apophis sent a private message to Lotus, explaining what had happened, that he would probably be away for a few hours, and that she had temporary command of the crew while he was gone. Then Apophis dove into the ring of light and passed through to the other side.